The Samaritans have always been an anomaly, both throughout history and still today.
I want to ask you your personal opinion. What do you think about the Samaritans? The majority of the stories of the Bible took place in what we call today Judea and Samaria. If you think about sort of the map of the state of Israel, you have on the west the coastal area where the big cities are today, on the east the Jordan Valley, and all that mountainous and sort of really rugged terrain. That's Judea and Samaria. That's the heartland of the people of Israel. And up on the northern part of Samaria is where the Samaritans, Mount Gerizim sits. This is the holiest of sites for the Samaritan community, and it's one of the most well-recognized places of worship in Samaria.
At Mount Gerizim, I met with David, an Israeli tour guide with a deep understanding of ancient peoples, especially those found in the Holy Land.
Israel is an amazing society. Israel is the only Jewish state in the world, and the only country in the world that has a Jewish majority. But in Israel, we have many minorities. The Samaritans are a tiny nation. They consider themselves Israelites, descendants of the northern kingdom of Israel, whereas the Jews consider ourselves descendants of the southern kingdom of Judea. 1,000 years ago, there were 1.5 million Samaritans in this region. And 100 years ago, there were less than 150 Samaritans. Today, there are 850. The community is actually growing and thriving today. But it is a miracle that they have succeeded in surviving many wars and conquests that have taken place in this region and have maintained their culture and their faith. That is truly, truly amazing.
This one tiny minority outlasts everyone else. They outlasted the Jewish population for much of history, the Arabs who came and went, the Christians who came and went. They're the only ones who really remained here. When do the Samaritans date back to?
That's where the dispute between the Jewish narrative and the Samaritan narrative begins.
The Samaritans are a Semitic people that practice a religion very similar to Judaism, and they've maintained this practice in the Holy Land for thousands of years. And their sacred language is an ancient form of Hebrew. According to Samaritan tradition, the Israelites originally built a tabernacle on Mount Gerizim in the north of Israel. Then, King Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, and Israel split into two kingdoms. The southern kingdom in Judea, with Jerusalem as its capital, and the northern kingdom, with Shechem or Nablus as its capital. The southern kingdom eventually became what we know as the Jewish people today, while the northern kingdom became the lost tribes of Israel, cut off from the rest of their people. The Samaritans say that they are the descendants of this northern kingdom that never really stopped worshiping on Mount Gerizim. But if you ask Orthodox Judaism for their version of events, the story is slightly different.
So what are we looking at, Abood? What is the significance of this place?
This is really where the tabernacle of the Samaritans was built, what we believe 3,650 years ago. We believe that Joshua came here and built it. This is really the holiest point for the Samaritans.
I had the privilege of exploring Mount Gerizim with Abood Cohen. He comes from the Samaritan priestly tribe and has become one of the go-to guides between his people and the outside world. But he also represents the next generation of Samaritans on Mount Gerizim.
So when you're born as a Samaritan, the community raises you since when you are 5 or 3 years old to even start speaking ancient Hebrew. So when you're 5 years or 6 years old, you might finish reading the Torah. By the age of 8, you already can do the bar mitzvah here.
Wait, so your bar mitzvah is not age dependent?
It's not age dependent. By the way, Samaritan does means, well, we say shomrim, right? Which means keepers. We do believe that we are keeping what our ancestors have kept and what their ancestors have kept.
The Samaritans give us a glimpse into our past. In many ways, they're a living testament to the ancient history of the Jewish and the Samaritan people here in the land. And that's what's so unique about their story, that like many other people here in the Middle East, you look at them and you can see the living testament of thousands of years of history and heritage and tradition. And that's why our connection to them is so meaningful, because we come from the same source and the same root here in this land.
The Samaritans on Mount Gerizim live in a village next to their holy mountain and just a short ride from Nablus in the Palestinian territories. Abood invited me to join him at their synagogue, where I also met Yefet, a Samaritan priest and the brother of the high priest.
Hello, hello. What a beautiful place.
Welcome to visit us. The Jewish read Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Ahad. The Samaritans we read like this: Shema Yisrael, Shema Eloheinu Shema.
Samaritan religious customs are a throwback to Judaism's past, helping us understand what Jewish practice may have looked and sounded like thousands of years ago.
What happens in this place? Like, what are the prayers that happen?
Please. We pray in the ground. Why? Because this is from Prophet of Moses. All the Israelites, we pray on the ground.
This is how Samaritans prayed, and it's actually how we as Jews used to pray in the synagogue. There are specific points in the Jewish prayer book where we are called to bow, like the Samaritans still do today.
I think that's what's special about the Samaritans, is that you've never had to live as a small group outside of the country. You were always inside of the community.
Yes.
So the tradition always stayed the same. You never were small minorities surrounded by enemies. And you can tell because you don't have to be afraid of the tradition. You don't have to hide. You don't have to change.
The similarities between Jews and Samaritans are astounding. It's not hard to believe that we were once one people worshiping the same God on different mountains. But this still does not resolve the question of if the Samaritans are part of the Jewish people.
Do you define yourself Jewish or related to the Jewish people? Or is it a separate identity that is disconnected?
We believe that we are remnants of the ancient Israelites who entered the Holy Land 3,600 years ago. There were no Samaritans and there was no Jews. There was nothing called Samaritans. But after 450 years, there was a split. Maybe you heard about the kingdom of Judah and Samaria, right?
Yeah.
And the kingdom of Samaria was also called the kingdom of Israel. And we believe we were a part of the kingdom of Israel. It's a common question that we get asked, are you Israelis or are you Palestinians? And the truth is, we are neither and we are both at the same time. It's more complicated than people think. Technically, we do have the Palestinian and the Israeli ID. So what I like to say is that we are really kind of a link between both nations. I think we have a unique perspective of being able to see both really easily.
The Samaritans are in a tough spot. Abood's community on Mount Gerizim sits in disputed territory between the Israelis and Palestinians. The other community of Samaritans lives within Israel proper, just outside of Tel Aviv, and their identity is much more closely tied to the Israeli people. I went there to visit Menashe, to see how they manage the complexities of being both Israeli and Samaritan.
בוקר טוב, מנשה, מה שלומך?
בוקר אור, אהלן, מתי. תפדל.
זה הבית?
כן.
יפה מאוד. מה המאפיין של השכונה הזאת? אתם חלק מהשומרונים, כל השומרונים.
השומרונים התאכלסו באזור הזה בשנת 1955. סך הכל היו בהתחלה 30 משפחות. כבר יש פה מעל 140 בתים.
זו המזוזה השומרונית.
זאת המזוזה.
הרבה יותר גדולה מהיהודית.
The mezuzah is a blessing from Deuteronomy that God commanded us to hang on the doorposts of our house. Today, Jewish mezuzahs are small and hidden inside the doorpost, likely a result of years of persecution and keeping a low profile in the diaspora. But the Samaritan mezuzah is large and prominently placed. Perhaps the Jewish mezuzah would still look the same if we never had to hide our identity.
כמה זמן המסורת הזאת קיימת? כמה שנים?
אלפים.
כמה אלפים?
3,650 שנה.
Menashe, a proud Samaritan and Israeli, served in the IDF for 40 years. Throughout the years, and still today, he's always made time to teach ancient Hebrew to the next generation.
ברשת, bara, אלוהם, it, השמם, wit, הארץ.
This is how he helps preserve the heritage of his people.
זו השפה שדוברה בארץ ישראל לפני מעל 3,000 שנה.
מימי משה רבנו ויהושע בן נון שעבר עם בני ישראל לארץ הקדושה. תומר, תכיר את מתי.
מה שלומך?
נעים מאוד, מה שלומך?
טוב מאוד, טוב מאוד. For you, Tomer, what does it mean to be Israeli? Are you first Samaritan or Samaritan Israeli? How do you look at it?
First, I'm a Samaritan, then Israeli.
And do you feel the two identities collide or combine well?
I don't think there is any difference. For me, Samaritans are part of Israeli people. The Jewish people are like my brothers.
What is your interaction when you tell people, when you look Israeli, if such a thing existed, you look like anyone else on the street? When you tell people I'm Samaritan,
Yeah.
what is the response?
First, they looking at me and ask, you don't look much different than I. Don't see the beard. Where is the hat? Where is the jacket? We are same people, eventually.
So it's a natural connection.
The Samaritans have always been an anomaly, both throughout history and still today.
I want to ask you your personal opinion. What do you think about the Samaritans?
So here we see two narratives that do not connect. The Samaritans say, we are Israelites. We entered the land with Joshua. And then you have a Jewish rabbinical narrative saying, no, you guys are newcomers, you're not real Jews. And if you ask me, I think that the scholarly narrative, the third narrative, is that it's somewhere in between.
It seems as if God has chosen to bless the Samaritans and sustain them in this land for thousands of years. Their history and strong bond with the Jewish people makes them simultaneously a relic of the past, a modern miracle, and an important part of Israel's future.
The values are the same, the beliefs are the same. We really have a really strong connection with the Jewish people. Even in our prayers, we have this small prayer to reunite the Jewish people from all over the world to
Really?
come to the Holy Land. Well, in ancient Hebrew, we say,
You know, sometimes the Jews speak about seeking the lost tribes of Israel. So the Samaritans, they're a tiny people, but they're here and they're raising their hand and they're saying,
Hey, what about
we're
us?
not lost, we're here.
Thank you for joining us as we provide a spiritual insight of what God is doing in Israel and in the Middle East. If you want to learn more about what God is doing in Israel, make sure to visit us on our webpage and follow us on social media. Shalom, and God bless you from Jerusalem.